This is the Observations Podcast for Sunday, the 17th of March, 2024. Welcome to the podcast. I'm Dale Franks. Michael Wade is here. He is coming online, and he will be with us shortly. So welcome back to the podcast, and we have we have an interesting thing to start the day off with, and there we go. Michael is now logged in. Hello, Michael. All right, so there's something I want to talk about because it's been a fascinating 24 hours. If you want to watch propaganda being manufactured in real time, all you have to do is look back at Trump's speech from yesterday and look at what has happened to it. In fact, I've got it all lined up, and I just want to walk right through it just to show what is happening. I'm a little confused because we don't have any viewers. Oh, there we go. All right, the viewers are now popping in. I guess there was a little problem with YouTube counting the number of viewers. It was like at 0, and that's unusual. But we do have viewers now. Hi, viewers. Welcome if you're just tuning in. So let's walk through this propaganda thing, and then we'll talk about it. So let me share my screen here, and let me add you to the screen. So this came out yesterday. This clip from Donald Trump came out yesterday. Now we're going to hear the whole 1 minute and 5 seconds of this clip. So I want to hear that first before we move any further so that we get an idea of what exactly Donald Trump was saying.
Mexico has taken, over a period of 30 years, 34% of the automobile manufacturing business in our country. Think of it, went to Mexico. China now is building a couple of massive plants where they're going to build the cars in Mexico and they think that they're going to sell those cars into the United States with no tax at the border. Let me tell you something to China. If you're listening, President Xi, and you and I are friends, but he understands the way I deal, those big monster car manufacturing plants that you're building in Mexico right now, and you think you're going to get that, you're going to not hire Americans, and you're going to sell the cars to us. Now, we're going to put a 100% tariff on every single car that comes across the line, and you're not going to be able to sell those cars. If I get elected, now if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole, that's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That'll be the least of it. But they're not going to sell those cars. They're building massive factories. A friend of mine,
Okay, so that's Trump's original comment. Let's not get into the tariffs bit of this. That's a separate issue. But I hear this, and I don't see anything particularly exceptional about it, right?
No, I mean, it's a prediction.
Yeah. And it's a prediction about the auto industry and about China and about Geely and other Chinese manufacturers selling cars in the United States. If you look at the news coverage, there seems to be a little loss of content. Trump predicts bloodbath if he loses election. Trump says there'll be a bloodbath if he loses. Trump says some migrants are not people and warns of bloodbath if he loses. When is a bloodbath not a bloodbath? Trump says some undocumented immigrants are not people, warns U.S. will see a bloodbath if not reelected. But wait, it gets better. Because then you have the Biden-Harris campaign giving us this clip.
Now, if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole, that's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That'll be the least of it. Now, if I...
All right. That seems to lack some context. Yeah. And then, of course, they released a statement about this, and that is not the statement. The statement is here. They released a statement about it. Tonight, Donald Trump said there would be a bloodbath if he wasn't elected, and that if he lost, there would be no more elections. By the way, that's not what he said. Later on in the speech, he said, he was talking about election fraud and things like that, and he basically said, if I lose, he said, and I believe I'm quoting, if I lose, I'm not sure there'll be another election. It doesn't mean that he's not saying there won't be. He said, if I lose, I'm not sure there'll be another election. Again, context, but let's forget that. If he lost, there would be no more elections. After opening the general election by meeting with authoritarian leaders and rallying alongside conspiracy theorists, Donald Trump continues to praise dictators, promise to pardon political, blah, 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 blah. And they're not the only ones. Of course, Nancy Pelosi, she had to come out as well.
Because he's even predicting a bloodbath. What does that mean? He's going to exact a bloodbath? There's something wrong here. How respectful I am of the American people and their goodness. But how much more do they have to see from him to understand that this isn't what our country is about?
It's fascinating. And by the way, I do want to go back to this, because this is it. You may think that you hate the media. You may think that the media is lying to you. You don't hate them enough, because this is pure propaganda. This is how political lies are manufactured. And we've seen it before, but this is really amazing. And by the way, I don't know who this end wokeness character is on Twitter. What I can say is that in terms of this particular clip and this story, they are doing God's work in actually going to each one of these things and responding with the original context. In fact, if you go back to the Biden deal, and you can just go down here and you can see, it used to be the top reply here, but it was maybe I had the wrong post. Maybe it was this one, or 4 that I have marked. Although this is a good little meme here. The way that they've showed that.
It is good.
But her or his response, was here's the full context. Ratio this account, because they're actually showing the entire 1 minute and 4 seconds, and you can see how much response they're getting in terms of people realizing that this has all just been a massive lie. There is no way that this can be excused by, ignorance or what have you. This is purposeful. This is how propaganda gets created. And that, I think, you want to talk about having free and fair elections. How do you have free and fair elections whenever every single sense-making organ you has is willing to feed you propaganda rather than the truth?
Yeah, I thought this was the misinformation and disinformation that we were warned about. Yeah, I mean, they've been doing this for years. I mean, I distinctly remember the whole, there was Dan Quayle and the spelling of potato. There was it was George H.W. Bush and being fascinated by a scanner in a grocery store. I mean, they pump these things up into narratives and just hammer away. I mean, it's an in-kind contribution to the Democratic Party. It always has been. They know that we know, and they're still going to keep doing it.
And here's the weird thing. One of the reasons why this struck me with some resonance is that when I got up this morning, Chris came and talked to me. Chris got up very early this morning, and she was actually doing some work this weekend. And she was speaking online with a client who referenced this and said, Trump can't be, something to the effect of Trump can't be trusted. He said he'd cause a bloodbath. And she was like, that's just not what that's not what... But that's not it. That's not what he said. That's certainly not what he meant. And that's not what the context is, but it doesn't matter. Because as Winston Churchill said, a lie can make it halfway around the world before the truth can tie its shoes. And this is what we're seeing now with the media, and just the amazing lockstep reportage that we just saw on just from Google News in their coverage of that speech. It's
journalist still lives.
Oh,
We
yeah.
saw it with Fiery and Feisty after the State of the Union. We see it here with Bloodbath. I mean, I still remember, and I bet you can still go find references. I remember, who was it? The Australian writer who first alerted and then updated and kept updating references to a plastic turkey when George
yeah.
W. Bush showed up in Iraq on Thanksgiving, a surprise visit for the soldiers. Oh, but it was a plastic turkey. It wasn't a plastic turkey, but that got sold. And the media still relies on that. They go back and say, oh, yeah, it was plastic turkey. I mean, they talk about plastic turkey moments. Once this stuff catches hold, they never let it go.
And I don't know how to fix it. If you don't have a media that cares about the truth, I don't know how you fix that. I don't know how you preserve any semblance of a democratic society when the only way that you can even come near to the truth with the media is if it happens to coincide with whatever their preferred narrative is.
Well, you could overturn New York Times versus Sullivan. That would be a really good start, because where this has the most impact is in the political arena. And regardless of whether you're famous or not, if somebody calls you a Nazi, if somebody completely misquotes and actively tries to misframe what you said, and accuse you of the most awful things, you should have recourse in civil court.
All right,
and you shouldn't get a pass just because you're a newspaper.
All right, let's cover briefly NYTV Sullivan, where it was what set the standard for libel for public figures in modern America.
It created a two-tier justice system, yes.
Right. And so if you're a media corporation, you have to, all you have to show is absence of malice.
Right.
Basically.
You don't even have to show that, actually. You don't have to show anything.
Oh, yeah, right. The plaintiff has to prove that you exercised malice.
Right.
And in a situation like this, you would think that it would be easy to show malice. It's not, because there's a specific definition of malice.
That's right.
And
it's very subjective, as you can imagine.
Yeah, but
and it's not in a statute anywhere. It's not like there's any findings or rulings.
Yeah, this is entirely
all judge-made law.
Yeah, it's entirely created by the Supreme Court in New York Times versus Sullivan. Doesn't exist inside American law anywhere. And it's now, one of the bedrocks of our First Amendment. Well, is it? I mean, the First Amendment certainly allows you to say whatever you would like to say, but libel and defamation exists. And the way that the law is structured now, this sort of thing can go on, and you really have no recourse. And I think that the thing that irks me most about this is that just looking at this from common sense, forget the legal stuff, just a normal person looking at this from common sense, seeing what Trump said, and then seeing how it was reported, it is difficult to come up with any sort of reconstruction of events that does not include deliberate mendacity in this sort of reporting. It's clearly intentional lying. And you would think that would be, prime for some sort of defamation or libel lawsuit, but New York Times versus Sullivan makes it extremely hard. That's one of the reasons why when people are going to do defamation stuff or libel stuff against papers or news organizations, if they can, they like to go to the UK.
That's right.
Because the UK...
Who was it that sued the Southern Law Poverty Center, but had to do it over in the UK? Was it Sargon?
Sargon of Akkad, yeah.
Sargano, yeah,
and won.
he's British based, so he had more of
He had
a reason to
standing
be there.
in
Yeah,
the UK courts because the UK doesn't.
but he wouldn't have won here.
Yeah, he wouldn't have won. He wouldn't have been able to prove it. But the UK does not have this stupid absence of malice thing. I don't know why newspapers get any sort of free pass that anyone else gets. This idea that journalism is some special priestly class that gets their own special rules. God, not the entire, but a great part of the Warren Rehnquist era of the Supreme Court really went over the top in terms of just creating law, because I think that was where we also got qualified immunity, wasn't it?
It was during that time. I think that was during Warren. Yeah.
Yeah. So now look, there were some great things that came out of that. Miranda, super important in terms of civil liberties. Desegregation. I mean, there were some wonderful things that came out of that era, but like every pendulum, there were a couple of ways in which it sprung too far. And so now these news organizations just feel perfectly free to lie the way that they've lied about
to say whatever they want about a famous person. And so I guess famously Deadspin, which is now dead, was sued into oblivion by Hulk Hogan. So, I mean, they can still go overboard, but for their daily political coverage, they can make up whatever narrative they want, and they do. Yeah, and the fact that all of these major news organizations follow the same script I think that's what's most dangerous.
Yeah, which, by the way, is evidence of some sort of collusion.
Yes,
in terms of how they report.
There should be an economic incentive to out-report the others, but there's not, because they're all pulling for the same side. This is political work. This is activism for them.
Okay, well, a couple of comments. It's working surprisingly well, the propaganda. Yes, it is, as we talked about earlier. I've previously wondered if some sort of open source AI could take over news distribution. Interesting question. The problem is a problem that is covered in a later comment. Pure laziness on the outlets reprinting the wire stories, but that's the best case. Sure, everybody's reprinting what the AP says, and if the AP lies, everybody's going to repeat those lies because nobody's checking up on it.
They're not checking up on it.
Nobody's fact checking the AP. But going back to the open source AI, yeah, it's a great idea, but somebody actually has to be at the rally. Somebody actually has to take down the statement. The news, the
information has to be gathered somewhere.
Yeah, the news has to be gathered. The story has to be written. From that point on, sure, AI could take over news distribution, but look, AI is like any other computer system. Well, we have this, I don't understand this idea that we have about AI, about, self-generated thing. AI is a bunch of big if statements. If A, exactly, then B. Right. If B, then C. Or maybe not.
And it learns from those.
Yeah, yes. Maybe not if statements. Maybe we should call them switch statements. For those of you who do a little programming, the if statement is like an if, then, else. The switch statement is, okay, here's a whole list of events. Match them up and select the case that matches the event. But in any event, that's all it is. It's really just an algorithmic decision-making machine that goes through a decision tree and then comes out with something. And if you input at the beginning of it garbage, then the output that you get at the end of it will be garbage. And you can make the output worse. Look at what Google did with Gemini when you Googled, World War II German soldier, and it showed you black people in Nazi uniforms because it had been programmed to be, diverse and inclusive. There are some things you don't want to be diverse and inclusive. AI can't figure that out. AI just does what it's told. So we're not at the point of AI being a thinking, living, reasoning, rational being. And so if your initial reporting is bad, then the AI reporting is going to be bad. But I think having a more British system of libel law would help put the kibosh on some of this stuff. If the New York Times ended up with a, couple of $500-600 million defamation suits lost, there would be an economic incentive. And by the way, I think there needs to be. As much as I would like to have as free a press as possible, individuals, which by the way, if you are not a public person, you can, in fact, sue the New York Times and probably have a much better chance of winning than you do as a public person. But there needs to be some sort of economic incentive simply to tell the truth. Because the truth is an absolute defense against libel or defamation.
That's right.
And so all you'd have to do is tell the truth and nobody would sue you. But we have a situation now where you can't be sued. I mean, look, whatever you may think about Bill Westmoreland, who was the commanding general of Military Assistance Command to Vietnam for much of the 1960s, and whose eagerness to hear good news from the field colored his assessments of how the war was progressing in Vietnam. The fact is CBS did a horrific hit piece on him. And he was able to sue them, and it did show up in court, but of course he lost. Because that bar against, absence of malice. Hell, there was a great Paul Newman, Sally Field movie called Absence of Malice, which I
just watched it recently.
Which I heartily recommend.
It is a really good movie, and it's actually very apropos to what's going on today.
And by the way, it's a movie in which Wilford Brimley appears for 3 minutes and steals the entire movie.
He's one of the top rated or the top line stars, and he's not there until the very end.
When we finish this meeting, one of two things is going to be true. So I think that's really the only thing that can be done, other than, like the left always used to tell us, when Twitter was censoring everybody, well, build your own Twitter. Okay, build your own news. Good luck with that.
It's been done.
Yeah, it has been done a couple of times.
I mean, essentially, that's what Fox News was, right? I mean, that's why it rose to prominence.
Yes,
and now you have the cable stations. You got Newsmax. You got OAN.
Right, but
and they just split up the same chunk of people. Amongst themselves.
It certainly takes a lot of money to be able to get into
have this sort of
business.
Cultural penetrance that penetrance. I don't think that's a word.
Penetration.
That the liberal media has is, that takes a very long time and a lot of money.
And by the way, nobody watches OAN or Newsmax.
Yeah, they're very lightly watched.
I mean, you can look at their ratings; they're in the thousands in a country of 330 million people. That
they're also not carried on a lot of cable packages, but
sure, which that gets us into a whole nother can of worms as to why they're not carried. But it's amazing. We back in the early 2000s, I'm not sure he would say so now, but back in the early 2000s, Jeremy Clarkson on Top Gear had a thing. And Top Gear was filmed in front of a studio audience at a hangar at a RAF World War II airfield in southern England. And every time there was an American who showed up there, he would go, "Oh, where are you from? America? Ah, welcome to the free world." Which is very snarky and stuff to say, but it wasn't entirely untrue.
At the time.
Yeah, at the time. We're 20 years ago. We're going back to 2004, 2007. That was a while back. But the thing is, we think we have this free society. We think we get the news and we have no sense-making institutions that aren't completely corrupt. And because we have no incorrupted or uncorrupted sense-making institutions, we don't actually know what's going on. And because we don't know what's going on, it's
the
impossible.
education system should be included as part of that, because that's one of the reasons a lot of people can't figure out what's going on. They're not taught how to think. They're taught what to think, who the bad guys are and who the good guys are. And that's all they know.
And they're certainly not taught to reason. Hell,
No.
a quarter of all high school graduates aren't even taught to read. And in fact, in California, which pays something like $13,000 per year per student.
I think it's more than that.
Yeah, nearly 40% of high school graduates are functionally illiterate and can't read past the 4th or 5th grade level.
In Baltimore, they spend definitely more than that. And there are entire school systems that have nobody that's math eligible or reading eligible to graduate their current grade. They have no skills at all.
You know, we talk about institutions a lot, and it's most Americans, and I think it's because we are the wealthiest and most privileged society that has ever existed in human history. And we just assume that it must be because we're virtuous and all of our stuff works. Look, I would argue that in the 1940s and 50s and 60s, all of our stuff largely worked.
For a long time.
I would not argue that today. There has been a fundamental shift. Our institutions have all been captured by ideologues. I mean, talk about education. All right, California, 40% of high school graduates are essentially functionally illiterate. Okay, what do you have to do to be a teacher in California? And by the way, California is not unusual. This is largely true in all 50 states. First of all, you have to take a course of university undergraduate education, which specializes in childhood education. And then once you have done that, you have to pass a certificate and be certified as a professional teacher. And then beyond that, you must take a series on a recurring basis of continuing education at either well, there are some undergraduate stuff, but it's largely at the postgraduate level to maintain current in the modern theories of pedagogy so that you can teach. I mean, these are literally certified professionals. Our entire education system is run by a certified class of professionals.
Experts.
Exactly. And these experts who have been educated and certified specially to educate our children can't manage to get all of our children just to do basic reading by the time they leave school. Now, look, there are obviously many other social and parental and other responsibilities that go into the mix here, but 60% is not a passing grade for what should be a certified professional endeavor, which fails.
Well, it fails at what we expect of it, but I don't think it fails in what it actually sets out to do. And that is to create young activists.
That may in fact be the problem. What they are intending to do and what we think they're
very good at
to do is two entirely different things. What we're expecting is children that can just tell us off the top of their head what 10 times 12 is, or, how to spell.
Who can function in a civil society, who know how to show up at work on time, who can read basic instructions and perform basic tasks. I mean, this is not that hard. People came over here not knowing any freaking English. They still come over here not knowing any freaking English. And they are able to learn it in less than 6 months.
And you know what's really weird about the K through 12 educational system as compared to the university system where I taught for a decade? I don't do that anymore because I just don't have the time. If you want to teach at the college level in California, all you need is a master's degree in the subject in which you wish to teach. and some evidence, and it could be, corporate training experience, some evidence that you know your way around a classroom. And that's it. There's no certification for college professors. There is only, hey, do you have a master's degree in this field? If so,
you don't have to have a terminal degree.
You have to have a master's degree, which in many fields.
But that's not terminal.
No, look, it's not terminal. Technically, if you want a tenured position at a California university, you're going to need a PhD. There are more PhDs than there are university jobs, so the competition at the tenured professor level is pretty high. If you just want to teach at the University of Phoenix or at, California State San Marcos or Palomar College, or I can only think of colleges around where I live, master's degree. And you can get hired on as an adjunct professor. And you can be on the adjunct faculty, and you teach, 1 or 2 classes a semester per contract. And if the university decides they never want to, give you another contract, they certainly can. If they want to keep giving you contracts, they can. And you can teach at the university level, because the entrance is, first of all, you have a degree in the field in which you want to teach. You have a master's degree. If you do, hey, guess what? You've got in. So I taught business and economics. I'm qualified to teach those courses. Great. Here you go. Here's a class. Here's 10 to 30 young people, or 12 to 30 young people. You just teach away, mister. And you can't do that. You can't walk into a public school system and say, hi, I have a master's degree in math, let's say. I have a master's degree in math. I'd like to teach, 10th grade math. Oh, well, do you have an education degree? No. Yeah, it's going to be tough to get you in, because the certification requirements for K through 12 are kind of different than the ones that you have at university.
And that's not just public schools. That's also private schools.
Oh, yeah, that's right. In many states, and this is not universal, but in many states, you can't teach, even in a private school, without meeting the state standards for certification for teaching. And those certifications seem to be so useful based on who's graduating and what their level of competence is. And by the way, and I've seen this personally at the university level, students are having to be shuffled into. I used to teach one of the courses I used to teach. Well, first of all, let's not get into macroeconomics. Teaching macroeconomics was a disaster because no one can do the math. No one can do the statistics. And students that are, even something simpler like operations management, which has some light statistics to it, and is largely a lot of simpler math. The number of students I had that were just crushed by the mathematics requirement was astounding. And by the way, this was a 300 level course, and they still could not do the basic mathematics required in an operations
all
management.
Theory, man.
Yeah, it's not all theory. I mean, you have to take distances and times and calculate the center of gravity of a delivery route, so that you can make. Operations management is kind of hard, but I mean, each individual piece shouldn't be hard. And I had students that couldn't do the individual pieces, and so universities are now having to toss their kids into remedial reading and remedial mathematics classes before they can even allow them into any course that has any sort of intellectual rigor at all. And if they don't, they'll just fail. And one of the reasons why so many businesses now, for jobs like, inside sales representative, I really need a bachelor's degree to be an inside sales representative? Yeah, because it's the only way, because a high school degree is now worthless. So the only way that I can tell whether you do anything, whether you have the ability to stick something out and figure stuff out, is, did you graduate college?
Yeah, could you set aside self-gratification long enough to actually complete a task, a hard task of completing college? And in how many years did you do it?
By the way, I am told by chat showing up on time is racist.
Yeah, I've heard that. Well, we known about color people time for, I mean, decades.
Yeah, even black people talk about color people time. I think who was it? Who was it? I think it's
I
Dave.
think was it Chris Rock?
Chris Rock.
No, it was before him. It was before him.
I can't remember who it is. It seems to me that Dave Chappelle has done a bit on it too, but I can't remember. Oh, by the way, going back to Google,
Was it Cedric? It might have been Cedric the Entertainer.
It might have been going back to Google Gemini. One of the things that people were doing because of the way Google Gemini was outputting stuff is they would be putting in input prompts like, show me a 15th century king of Spain eating watermelon and fried chicken. And of course, the inevitable picture would be generated by Google Gemini. And so what that enabled people to do is to post racist memes using Google Gemini simply by tweaking, which by the way is why Google Gemini no longer has an image generating function built into it. Or I'm sure it's built into it.
Yeah, that's right.
It's just not accessible. They shut that down.
It's called open source testing.
Yeah.
That's how beta gets worked out.
Yeah, their open source testing turned out to be pretty bad.
Whoops. That's like when, what was it on, was it on Twitter? They did that, that AI girl or whatever. And within like less than a week, she was being sexually adventurous and inquisitive and quite submissive, while also spouting like every racist Nazi thing she could think
Yeah, I think they trained her like on Reddit.
That's what it was.
And so, yeah, it took a good couple of training sessions with Reddit to turn her into a racist e-girl. Yeah. Which, by the way, also, there is a model now who's making about $11,000 a month. And it's completely AI generated via Midjourney. And she went on Instagram, and now brands are hiring her as a brand model. And it's like, you know, $1,000 per engagement. It's
with all the hentai and
well, like
the other stuff out there.
They don't want hentai. They just want an attractive woman to be the face of their product. And you know what?
Well, but I mean, obviously people don't care so much if it's real or not.
Well, here's the thing. You don't have to deal with people. You don't have to worry about their likes or dislikes. You don't have to set up their photo session. You can say
you don't have to pay them.
Yeah, you can go to you can literally go to Midjourney on Discord, add the Midjourney Discord to bot to your Discord server, and then you can just type in prompts. Show me a brunette at sunset, shot on Kodak Gold 400. Enter, and Midjourney will make you a photorealistic woman that now can become your model. In fact, I saw a YouTube video of a guy who actually went through the process of creating your own AI model. Now, at least he, on her Instagram, had the foresight to, in her bio, put hashtag AI model. But he just, used Midjourney to create her in, different situations and create modeling shots for her. So, AI can do things like that. It's not very good at thinking for itself. But we're getting way off of the track, which is how corrupt our institutions are, especially the press.
The depravity might have something to do with it.
Yeah. But again, these aren't, sexy photos. They're just, attractive women used as models. I'm sure, look, there are OnlyFans AI models. So doing OnlyFans things, which reminds me, I saw this great video on YouTube as a YouTube short. And this guy's holding up this thick stack of cash. And he says, look at all the money my girlfriend is making online just by selling fans. Only fans. Yes, she only sells fans, and all these people are. So you're king of not getting it,
Or
or
not caring.
so anyway, this whole thing has just really been. And here's the thing: we all know, or at least you and I, right? And I assume the people who are in chat, they all know that the news media operates in this way. It's been obvious for years, but it's only obvious to those of us who are, you and I, who are political junkie or
Right.
junkies,
We pay attention to all this shit. We see all the stupid nuances, and
or the people
and
who
we
watch
also
this,
remember all the old wars
or the people
and
who
battles.
watch
So
the podcast who are probably similar.
yeah,
This is not how a functioning society with a long-term lease on life works.
that's true.
And I don't know how
Which
we're
is
going to
what
fix
we've
it.
been saying for the past
That's how what we've been
7,
saying
8, 10 years. I don't know.
Yeah, well, longer than that. I mean, when you think about it, we've been doing this podcast for, first in audio form and then now for nearly 20 years.
Almost
at this
20
point.
years?
Yeah, 20
Yeah.
years. So we've
Jesus.
been doing it for a long time. You'd think we'd be a lot more successful than we were after 20 years of this, but apparently not. We're just going to believe that most people would prefer
We're
to
just
live in their
appealing to
illusion.
a more selective audience.
We have a selective appeal, as we put it. Elections. Speaking of which, there were elections, and in a shocking turn of events, Vladimir Putin won the presidential election in Russia by an 87% margin, the largest margin in the post-Soviet era. So 87.8, near enough to 88% of the vote via exit poll. So clearly Vladimir Putin is a super popular guy in Russia.
Well, you know the difference between Russian elections and American elections. In Russian elections, they have to fake the against votes.
When Trump said yesterday, because let's just take it through the whole stream. When Trump said yesterday, if I don't win, I'm not sure there'll ever be another election. I don't think that's, look, let's not pretend that Donald Trump is a precise speaker. I don't think that he meant that there just won't be elections. I think what he meant is that we'll never be able to trust the results of our elections.
Which we've been saying now, I know I've been saying for quite a while, and it has nothing to do with whether or not Trump is elected. I don't think it matters. Whether Biden is elected or Trump is elected, it's the damage has been done. I think it may be beyond repair. Yeah, Trump gets elected. Okay, there's going to be a lot of people happy, but there's going to be a lot of people who did what they did before, except this time on steroids and methamphetamine. They're going to go absolutely apeshit crazy. They are going to try to destroy him, destroy anybody who supports him. They're going to use every leverage that they can, they have a hold of. It's not going to be pretty.
I don't think that it will be much different no matter who wins.
Yeah, I agree.
Because I just think that we have, and look, we've spent outside of 2008 and 2012, but really since 2000, every election, whoever lost that election immediately yelled voter fraud.
Yeah.
And by the way, why wouldn't they? Because we do not have in this system, well, in many states, we certainly don't in California, we don't have an electoral system that ensures that the people who vote should be voting.
That's right.
And
even though it's mandated by federal law.
Yeah. Our voting experience in the primary back on the 5th. and I think I've talked about this before, maybe back in 2020. California goes through this elaborate charade of election security. You go in and they say, okay, give me your address. You tell them your address. What is your name? Tell them your name. Okay. And they find your name and your address on the voter rolls. And they say, okay, you can't get your ballot until you sign for your ballot. You have to sign. So you scribble something on an electronic pad. And they go, okay, now you need to certify what party you want to vote for. So here's this other document that you need to sign. So you sign that document. All right, fine. We've got your voter signature. We've got your primary ballot signature. Now we can give you your primary ballot, and they hand it to you. By the way, you want to see an ID? Just so that, I am who I say I am. Oh, no, we're not. In fact,
that's racist.
In fact, in 2000, I asked for that. Don't you need to see my ID? Oh, no. We can't ask for your ID. We're just going to make you hop through all of these little hoops, these security hoops.
Pretend that this is the same as you just show me your ID.
Yeah, to pretend that this is just you showing me your driver's license. Oh, that must be who you are. Now I know who you are. And your driver's license ID address matches your voter address. You must be the guy. Here's your ballot. No, we have to go through all of these hoops that we have to jump through, and they never ask us to prove who we are. So I could have gone in and said I was anybody I wanted to, because I can sign the thing and I can get my ballot and I can vote. And I guarantee you that there is nobody sitting in the San Diego County Registrar's office who's looking at my vote and matching the signature to my voter registration.
Yep.
So in this state, it's all security theater. And every time a state, Georgia, famously after 2020, when they said, okay, we're going to have a voter ID law. It is the return of Jim Crow to Georgia. Same thing happened in Florida. You cannot have voter ID laws without the Democrats coming out and saying, well, that's just racist. As if it is, unreasonable to expect minorities to have, driver's licenses.
Have you ever seen that Ami Horowitz man on the street interviews with, I'm pretty sure it was in Brooklyn, I think. It was in New York. And he goes and asks a bunch, he's up around Columbia, maybe, I think, and asking Columbia students, or, at least a lot of the people around there. Why do you think having or requiring voter ID is racist? Oh, because Black people a lot of times don't know where to get one. They haven't been educated on how to get it. It might be too costly for them. What if it's for free and they can get it online? Yeah, but they might not have access to the internet, and a lot of them don't have IDs. And then he goes over to the black side of town. And he goes, so it's weird. I asked a bunch of these white people what they thought about, why you shouldn't require ID to vote. And they don't think that Black people have IDs. Do you have ID? Yeah, I got an ID. You know anybody doesn't have an ID? No, everybody I know has an ID.
Yeah, you know why?
If you didn't have an ID, would you know where to get it? Yeah, I know exactly where it is.
Do you know why? Because you have to have some form of identification to get, utilities, to get
yes,
to get food delivered, to get. You need an ID for all kinds of. Don't even get me started about flying or anything like that. There are so many things that require an ID.
Rent a car, rent a truck, rent anything. Frankly, it's like, oh, these Black people, they just, they live, I guess, under floorboards
or just use
electricity.
Just go to Home Depot and use a credit card. Although with self checkout, it's not. But a lot of times they'll say, "Can I see your ID?" before they'll take your your credit card. It's a fundamentally racist assumption about the abilities of black people. One of the things that really has gotten me about the whole DEI thing is that it basically uses the same arguments that the Southern segregationists did.
Yes, that's right.
Which almost invariably, well, at least in the 1950s and 1960s, arose from an assumption of black inferiority.
Mm-hmm. And that's what the good government citizens councils were about. I mean, they were about making sure that the Negroes did not approach the white spaces. But they also took a rather
Paternalistic.
paternal, kind of, well, look, they need help and they're not necessarily very good at this. And so just so they don't get hurt, we need to keep them out of this and keep them out of that. And, you know, they need help with this. That's one thing.
White liberal paternalism is an unending well of, of what are racist assumptions. That's the thing that gets me. And one of the things that's going on in college campuses now are all these students are, oh yeah, we should have segregated dorms so that people could stay with their own. What? We did.
Yeah. Separate graduations, separate proms, separate dances.
We did a lot of work from 1945 to 1965 to stop that. For 20 years, we had a civil rights movement to end that sort of discrimination.
And we did a lot after that as well.
Yeah, and now you just want to bring it back. It's just astounding to me. Orville Faubus and Lester,
100% reversal of where it used to be.
Orville Faubus and Lester Maddox must be laughing in their graves.
Told you.
It's amazing to me. It's this.
Well, that's like that. Who's that? Those comedians, the one kind of floppy-haired redhead guy, kind of tall and skinny, and the other shorter guy, dark hair and a beard, and they, you know, the woke and the racist, and they're like, we agree. And
oh, yeah. That's who was that? Was that?
I can't remember his name. He's really good.
Yeah, I think that was associated with the Babylon Bee, but the liberal and the racist.
It wasn't. But
the liberal and the
I'm sure
racist agree on basically everything.
On everything.
Yeah, that.
You know, black actors should be, should have reserved rights for black characters. We agree. Leave each to his own kind. I mean, that's just basic intelligence.
Well, see, here's George W. Bush addressed this back in 2000 when he was running for president.
Bigotry of low expectations, yeah.
The soft bigotry of low expectations. And the idea being that, look, it doesn't matter what color you are. And in this case, it happened to be in the context of education. You should be held to every student should be held to the same standards. We shouldn't have separate standards for races or anything like that, because, as he realized, it's fundamentally racist to assume that black people cannot achieve at the same rate of white people.
Right.
So, they certainly are capable of doing so, but we...
And in fact, have at other...
Yeah, we have to...
Even today, but they did so even more so back before the Great Society.
Yes, that is true. One of the things that Booker T. Washington preached was black self-reliance in the early part of the 20th century. And you can look from like 1900 to basically 1960, and you can actually see a rising black middle class. You can see success and sure, things were segregated at the time, but there were black newspapers, there were black businesses, there were thriving black communities.
There was Black Wall Street in Oklahoma.
Yeah. And
well, until a certain time.
Yeah. But until a certain event. But yes. Black people were perfectly capable of being successful on their own terms, even in a society that was that enforced legal segregation and legal
structurally against
discrimination.
them, yes.
That was structurally against them. And it's amazing what has happened since the 1960s, where, yes, we had the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And at the same time, we built an incentive structure for the black community to destroy their own families.
Yeah. Which has unfortunately worked quite successfully.
And it has, by the way, destroyed the black community.
Every other family too, yeah.
In terms of businesses and everything else. And of course, it has now gone out into other areas. The rate of white illegitimacy in this country now is the same as what the black rate of illegitimacy was in the 1970s.
Mm-hmm. And it's getting worse.
Yeah, it's getting worse. And family breakdown, for all that it is, and this is probably one of the reasons behind it, where it's derided by progressives as some sort of holdover from the patriarchy, which has to be destroyed. In fact, one of the things on Black Lives Matter on their website, when they had one, their goals were the destruction of the traditional family.
That's always been a Marxist goal. It has been since even before Das Kapital. It was in the Communist Manifesto.
Because the destruction of the family
right.
removes the one major bulwark and the one major mediating institution between the people and the state.
Right.
And if you can destroy that, then
everybody's dependent on the state.
Everything within the state, nothing outside.
Nothing without the state. Oh, but he wasn't a socialist.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing. They've never tried real communism.
Right.
But when we do it, we'll do it right, will you?
Yeah. Never worked anywhere ever.
Yeah, everybody.
In a short time.
Yeah, everybody is sure that they'll do communism right.
I mean, the best you can offer up, I think, are probably the kibbutzes in Israel, which are decidedly socialist, but they're also heavily subsidized by the state, or else they wouldn't survive. Just ask Bernie. Bernie went and said, fuck this work. I'm just going to nap all day.
Yeah, Bernie was the quintessential American socialist. Yeah. But see, here's the thing that always falls through socialism, or in the Soviet Union, it was the Marxian idea of from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. And unfortunately, it's the from each according to his abilities that falls through the crack there.
Yeah.
Because as the joke used to go on the Soviet Union, they pretend to pay us, we pretend to work.
Pretend to work.
Yeah,
well, it was interesting too, because in the Soviet, after a certain amount of after the big farming initiative and a lot of starvation, there was allowed some private growing of crops for one's own needs, and you could sell a little bit as long as it wasn't too much. Well, what happened? Oh, all of a sudden these farming communities are flush with food.
Yeah,
the community ground, life pretty fallow.
Yeah, one of the things that Brezhnev did after he ousted Nikita Khrushchev was he allowed the collective farms to set aside 1% of land for personal gardens and personal production. And by the end of the Soviet Union, they were producing about 75% of the Soviet Union's domestically produced food. And the other 25% was coming from the large collective farms.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't seem to be a recipe for success. But the fantasy of socialism continues on.
Yeah, it's called utopia for a reason.
Yeah, and utopia always creates hell on earth. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm reminded of one of the things that P.G. O'Rourke wrote about visiting East Germany, showing, talking about the clothes that people were wearing. And he said, in Manhattan, this would all be real hipster style. But in East Berlin, this wasn't a look. These were their clothes.
Yeah, this is just what happened.
And
on 7th Avenue, this would be a big hit.
And people in Berlin were like the rich people in the Eastern Bloc.
Absolutely, yes.
I mean, you could buy a Trabant. So, I think the election is pretty much set. Donald Trump is going to be
looks like that way. I mean, they both have enough delegates now.
There's nothing that will keep them out, barring an act of God.
Barring something.
So, yeah, barring something. So,
I did see that. Who was it at the Washington Post? Wrote an op-ed encouraging Harris to step aside, and got a lot of backlash. It did not go well.
Kamala Harris was picked for a specific reason.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't her competence. And by the way, it wasn't her popularity. Kamala Harris never got more than 3% of the Democratic vote anywhere in any of the primaries in which she ran for president in 2020. So she's not popular in the Democratic Party. She's not well liked in the Democratic Party. She has a certain set of demographic characteristics that made her useful to choose as vice president. And now that it looks very much like Joe Biden, even if reelected, could not complete a second term. Although, I will point out, I didn't think he'd be able to complete a first term.
You weren't alone.
So, but I was wrong about that. But I think at this point, a second term.
The term's not over.
Yeah, well, that's true. It's not over. Having somebody in the co-pilot seat who can take over if the pilot has a coronary infarction seems like a much more important deal than it did even in 2020.
Yeah.
And I don't know where they go for that. The only candidate who has disavowed any interest in it, basically in the interest of his own future to avoid pissing anybody off. Well, I wasn't going to go to Michelle Obama. I was going to go to Gavin Newsom. But
yeah, everybody knows that his denials are fake.
Yeah, but I mean, they have to be the denials you make so that you don't look like you're
so
trying
you don't piss that off the
undercut your
overheads,
party. Yeah, exactly. But he doesn't seem to be a guy who has a record on which I would want to run for president if I was talking about my success as a governor.
Well,
outside of that, the outside is Michelle Obama.
Perhaps you had an entire national system that would sugarcoat and spin his actual record into looking like a magnificent record, successful, best state in the nation, blah, blah, blah.
Yes. And as we've seen, we have such a system. I just don't know how, with the media we have, I just don't know how our democracy ultimately survives. I mean,
originally, the whole reason I got into blogging in the first place was because I began to recognize, and certainly after 9/11, how incredibly biased and reductive the media, not just the news, but media in general, were. And it made me open my eyes to a lot of other things that I thought. And why did I think those? Oh, yeah, because, I guess I heard about it here. And this is the way it was displayed always in the movies and in books and whatever else. And when I got into blogging, that the news media was definitely the main target. And I think that's why a lot of people started blogging around that time, right after 9/11, is there was an obvious disconnect between the narrative that the media wanted to sell and what people were actually expecting and what they wanted. And it became divisive quickly.
And by the way, what they knew, I think Norm Macdonald had a famous line from a joke back in that era where he said, the thing that worries me is if the Muslims have some sort of nuclear attack that kills tens of millions of Americans. I mean, imagine the backlash against peaceful Muslims then.
Yep. And then one of my senators went and did the meme this past week. It's like, well, ever since October 7, there's been an enormous backlash against Islam and its followers, and we need to really battle this Islamophobia. You're doing the meme.
Yeah, Islamophobia isn't the problem.
In fact, there's not enough phobia of Islam as far as I'm concerned.
And by the way, there were other little subtle indications, and people who didn't know the source material wouldn't know this, but I remember there were a couple of movies that were made off of, one made off of a Tom Clancy novel.
Yeah.
And in the Tom Clancy novel, the bad guys, of course, were Islamic fundamentalist terrorists. But when they did the movie post 9/11, they didn't want to do that.
Right.
So they changed all the bad guys to neo-Nazis, German neo-Nazis.
We could still hate them, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That
good.
was the threat. So you've taken the source material and you've completely changed the context that made any sense in the source material. Because what you have to do is create this fictional, literally non-existent group of bad guys that turned it into a fantasy, right? I mean, it would have been a great movie in the 1930s, but nobody in 2004 was worried about neo-Nazis. That wasn't the big problem we were facing. And
well, nobody outside of the New York Times building.
Yeah, and a lot of people started to notice, and I think that's why a lot of people started blogging. But it sometimes feels like, and look, one of the reasons why we don't blog anymore is that it just felt like we were preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
Because everybody
saying a lot of the same stuff over and over and over.
Everybody was getting siloed into their own little circles of epistemic closure. And so there just wasn't any back and forth. You were talking to your crowd, people were talking to their crowd, and we began to develop, and I think social media is a large part of this, where we can now easily create this closed epistemic circle where we never see anything.
An echo chamber, yeah.
Yeah, where we never see anything with which we disagree.
That's one of the reasons I won't join True Social or I joined one of those at one point. Was it WeMe or something? And
it was WeMe, yeah.
And it was just, there were only right-leaning people there, and that was it. There's no skeptics. There was no just regular news. Everything was a political ad. Everything was just all political. It wasn't any fun. It was boring, and I didn't see the point to it.
Yeah, one of the things about Twitter, and look, Twitter, you can make your own perfectly closed circle if you want there too.
Yeah.
But at least you have access to other people. And so as much as I get irritated by seeing what he says, I follow people like Brad Woodhouse and Brooklyn Dad Defiant and Joe from Jersey, because I know that everything that they say is going to disagree with everything that I say. Now, I don't want to live in that. Look, whenever Gab first opened up, I was probably one of the first people who opened up a Gab account. I mean, I think I opened it up the day that Andrew Torba came out with the website. And I still have a Gab account. Do I look at it? Do I use it? No. Because I'm never going to talk to anybody hardly who's going to disagree with me there. At least not in the same way that there is on Twitter. I don't use Facebook. Facebook, you can't talk about anything real. Facebook wants you to talk about fluffy kitties and happy puppies, and that's about it.
And buying stuff.
Yeah, and buying stuff. And by the way, if you want to know why Facebook isn't charging you, it's because you're the product they're selling.
That's right.
And, you know, social media has not been a boon. That is one of the things that we all got wrong back in the late 1990s when we were looking at the internet and the explosion of the internet and the ability to we can access all of the information generated in human history, and you won't be able to hide the facts. And that is true. You can't really hide the facts. They will get out. But by God, they certainly are trying. Try to do a Google search nowadays.
I don't even use Google anymore.
I mean, you can find information on Google if you're willing to go all the way to page 10. But you're going
Can you still use the I feel lucky button?
I've never used the I feel lucky button. But the power that it gave us to access information also gave new power to new gatekeepers. And Google has decided that they're going to be a gatekeeper. And they're only going to show you narratives, at least on the first page or two. They're only going to show you narratives that agree. Google search is useless until you get to about page 5. If you're looking for anything remotely controversial. I mean, look, if you're doing computer programming stuff and you want to know what people are saying on Stack Exchange that might do your exact same problem and fix it, Google is great. But anything cultural or anything political, Google is useless. And the sad thing is, of course, that you could use DuckDuckGo, or you can use the other service, Quant, which is also a censorship-free service. But they're awful. I mean, DuckDuckGo is all because it uses Bing, and Bing is an awful search engine. And I very rarely find anything that I want on those search engines unless I'm looking for specific things. And then I know they're going to come up. And I know they won't come up on Google. And so the whole idea of we'll have this free internet and we'll all be able to have access to facts and a lot of this BS will go away. Well, all of the book age gatekeepers have decided that they still want to exercise their gatekeeping power. And the new power brokers of the information age have decided, hey, being a gatekeeper is a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I can remember back when Alta Vista was still a thing, and you could put in a general query and it would give you a broad array of possibly relevant subjects and websites and whatever. And then you could keep dialing down, you keep honing down. And it worked really good. I mean, there wasn't as much available on the internet back then, but you could get a really good narrow down to your subject, to the thing you're actually looking for in very little time. And even Google was that way, even in the early 2000s. And once they decided that, hey, wait a minute, we can actually shape things here. And they started doing that with businesses, right? I mean, Google, that was originally how they I guess it was the second iteration of monetization. The first was getting the ads, and the second was, hey, SEO, you pay us, we'll place you higher. We'll make sure that these key terms show. If they show up, then your website's going to be included.
Yeah, Google got corrupted by the SEO optimization, and the profit that was inherent in that.
Yeah.
And once you had taken that step, it became an easy step to also say, well, hey, since so many people use our service, we have a responsibility to point them in the right direction. And why some Silicon Valley tech bros think that they should be the go-to source for truth on political or social issues, I have no idea. But they just assume, and I think part of it is the corrupting influence of money. I'm rich. I must there be.
Sure.
I'm richer than 99% of the people. Therefore, I must be smarter than 99% of the people. And so it's just this assumption of superiority. I mean, say what you want about Elon Musk, but he doesn't strike me as a fellow who is so certain that he's right about everything.
Because he is actually intelligent.
But
he doesn't need anybody's laurels to bump that up. He doesn't need to exclude people to bump that up.
But I mean, that is, one of the interesting things about the HBO series about, I think it was called Silicon Valley, was how it punctured the enormous ego of the Googles and the Facebooks of this world, and how utterly divorced they had become from the real world. For largely ego reasons. Which reminds me, I have to show you this because it's always been one of my favorite. And I'm frantically typing to see if I can find it, because now that we've talked about it, yes, there we go. The one of the characters, who was sort of the Google character for this company that was called Hooli. He was Gavin Belson, and Gavin Belson, who ran Hooli, wanted to come out with a signature edition of his product, the Gavin B Signature Edition. And so this was the logo that he came up with for the Gavin B Signature Edition. And it really was brilliant how they kind of skewered all of these tech bros in Silicon Valley with that. And Google is just a perfect example of how they have just decided they know better than the rest of us. And why shouldn't they? They're rich. And if they weren't smart, they wouldn't be rich. And since they are smart, one of the things about the robber barons of the 1900s, when they decided they needed to give their money back, they gave it back by donating libraries and universities and, things like courthouses, things like that. What we get from our modern Gilded Age entrepreneurs is this culturally Marxist wokeism that infects everything they do. And so, like, if you want to search for the facts of a news story, who are they going to point you to? They're going to point you to Snopes. They're going to point you to factcheck.org from Pointer, because those are reliable sources. Except we can go, line by line in all the places where they weren't reliable.
It would take several podcasts.
It would take several podcasts to go through all of the mistakes that they had made. And I don't know what the solution to that is either. Other than to realize that almost everything we see now in public media and on the internet is largely manufactured. And the problem I think that we never really realized is that when you have this mass of information available, someone is going to have to filter through it for you. Otherwise, you're just going to be inundated in this mass of information that you'll never be able to make sense of. And if the people who are curating that information for you aren't going to do it honestly, you have no recourse.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I mean, it's something that as a, history degree holder, I've thought about a lot, is never, ever, each day, there is more verifiable historical information than has ever been available to anyone in the history of the world. And so every single day, there's even more and more information to gather. How do you comprehend that? How do you learn that? And on top of it, you've also got, and I'm not even really, there is definitely more bias introduced into how we review events of the past. But even beyond that, just even knowing what the events, how many people know what happened in 1066? Why is 1215 an important date? Why is 1440? Why is 1453? I mean, not knowing these basic events, regardless of what else you may know about it or think you know about it, if not knowing these basic events and how they plot course from point way back in forever A to point triple Z now, I mean, it's important to understand where we came from, where we're going. And with more information getting into the system and the more corrupted information getting into the system, I mean, you've got a perfect chaotic event.
There is an arcane, but to me personally interesting example of the Bronze Age collapse. Mm-hmm. So for those people who don't know, at the end of
1177.
Yeah, exactly. So you apparently know. At the end of the late Bronze Age, before the start of the Iron Age, so 1177 BC is as good a time as any. 1180.
Yeah, that's it. That's more of a when a lot of the stuff happened.
Yeah, there is something happened, and basically all of the major civilizations in the Mediterranean collapsed. Egypt, the Hittite Empire, the Mycenaeans, it all just fell apart. And population in that region declined from 600,000 people to about 330. Like in the Hittite Empire, it declined from like 600,000 people to about 330,000 empire. And then, ultimately the Hittite Empire disappeared. And if you wanted to know what had happened and you did a search, what you would hear largely, if you're like looking at YouTube, right? Because there's a big history YouTube. It would give you an hour-long dissertation about the Sea Peoples.
Right.
And you would walk away thinking, oh, well, it was all about the Sea Peoples. You would miss the last 30 years of evidence that the Sea Peoples, were a part of what caused the Bronze Age collapse.
And they actually may have been more of a symptom than a cause.
Yeah, or a result rather than a cause. Because those Sea Peoples may have been like Hittites and Phoenicians and others whose empires had just collapsed, because there was the collapse of civilization in Canaan, in Egypt, in Anatolia, in Mediterranean Greece. Everything just came apart at the seams. It's a much more complex story. And if you try to, like YouTube, which is run by Google, you will get a pretty standard answer. Oh, the Sea Peoples. Right. And you will miss so much nuance and so much that is important. And the Sea Peoples,
it's like, what was the cause of the Civil War? Just say slavery.
Well,
it's actually more nuanced than that. I agree.
It's more nuanced than that, but I think slavery was a pretty big deal.
Slavery was a much more important part of the U.S. Civil War than Sea Peoples were of the Bronze Age collapse. Let's put it that way.
But if that's where you're getting your information from, you're really receiving a skewed picture of history. And you might think, well, okay, who cares? The Bronze Age collapse is not something that is going to affect my daily life. So why do I care? Okay, well, you know what? Maybe you don't. It's an interesting academic question that interests people who are interested in history, and beyond that, it has no effect on your life. But you know what does have an effect on your life? Hearing the actual words that a presidential candidate said.
Right.
Knowing what the policies are. Illegal immigration. What are the actual effects of illegal immigration?
What are the actual numbers? We still don't know those. We're still working off this 11 million illegal residents that we've been working off of for
that's
25 years.
Yeah, that's from 2000. That's from the 1990s. Because I remember hearing in the 1990s, oh, there were like 7 million illegals in California. Okay, but 24 years later, it can't still be 7 million.
Right. Especially with millions coming across the border.
Yeah. I mean,
not all of whom are, even Hispanic, but
yeah. But look, the estimates are that Joe Biden, and these are just estimates, he's let in 10 million people.
I think that's probably low, to be quite honest. I think there's been over 50 million people injected into this nation over the past 20 some years. Now, a lot of those leave and come back, so you don't want to double count them. But the number of people who come here and stay here and then hope for amnesty, it's got to be well above 30 some million.
Yeah, and when all of your sense-making institutions cannot help you, you're kind of left adrift on this sea of information that is barely searchable, and that when you do search will return, results that push a particular narrative. You can't make political or social decisions in the absence of real information. And we're expected to try to figure out how to run a nation of 330 million people at the ballot box every 2 years. And it's even worse than that when we talk about what are we voting for. We're not even entirely sure what we're voting for. Because even that is presented to us in a way that makes it incline us towards voting one way or another.
Right. And let's be honest, for quite some time now, it's been vote against rather than vote for. Obama was definitely a vote for candidate in 2008. I don't know about 2012, but definitely in 2008, there was just no way he wasn't going to win. He was a vote for candidate. Everything else has really been a vote against candidate since maybe Bill Clinton's first term.
Yeah, well, see,
and even then, he didn't win the popular vote.
See, the vote for Obama, there was an implicit deal that everybody was making. And the implicit deal was, we will vote for the black guy to show that we're not racist.
Right.
That didn't work out.
That wasn't a good bargain.
Yeah. Not everybody lived up to that deal. And it was always interesting to me to hear Obama talk about how unfair this country was to black people from, the Oval Office.
Yeah. After going to Columbia and Harvard.
Yeah.
Poor guy.
It just, needs to be a better spokesman for that point of view than the president of the United States. He even got a
Hawaii hospital to fake his birth records. Come on, man. You got some pull.
And apparently somebody went back and reissued every copy of the Honolulu Star from the day after his birth. Boy, don't underestimate his power. They
recreated baby photos. They did all this stuff.
So I'm, as always, I'm a little pessimistic, because if you can't make sense of the world around you, then the world around you will never make sense. And if it doesn't make sense...
Well, it won't make sense through rationality. It'll make sense only through some belief system. And who knows what that could be.
Yeah. Well, look, Michael, we've been doing this for an hour and a half. So I guess it's time for us to stop doing this. Have a great week. We'll talk to you next week.
Happy St. Patty's Day.
Yeah, happy St. Patrick's Day to you as well, my lad.
Hey, happy St. Patrick's Day to you.
Oh, faith in Bagara.
Aaron Gobra.
Have a great week, Michael.
Bye.
And for the rest of you, Have a great week, too. We will look forward to seeing you again next time. And hopefully we will maintain this excellent streaming environment next time that we had this week, as opposed to the disaster of last week. So it looks like we are back, tanned, rested, and ready with good streaming. And hopefully we'll be back next week with more of it. Have a great week. We'll talk to you then. So long.